Hello, Internet, and welcome to episode 70 of the Deep Fried Neurons podcast. And today's topic is a little serious if you've not realized from the topic below. Mostly, we're talking about etymology and the phenomenon itself. I'm not going much beyond that. And I'm just gonna cue the fucking. So I was scrolling through the news the other day, as you do when you're quarantined and bored, and I found out that there is a surge in domestic violence reports, and it's a significant one. Apparently, the chairman of the child helpline, that is 1098, revealed that about 92,000 reports were given over normal in about 11 days, which is an insane number. Mind you, some of them were, of course, related to coronavirus and the spread of it and getting help for the homeless and things like that. But about a quarter of them, to 33%, were about domestic, physical, sexual, or emotional abuse against children or women, which is under POCSO, I think, Protection of Children under Sexual Offences Act, and Protection of Women Against Domestic Offences Act 2006. I'm not sure what the name of the legislation is for the second one. The first one, I'm assured that that's the name. And it was quite concerning. So first of all, I want to get through this, that gaslighting is inadvertently attached to the issue of domestic violence and domestic abuse. And I would rather have you listen to it from the experiences and research of people who have done way more than just read something about it on the internet, which is why I would recommend that you go through the video that Story Hunter put out with this activist who went around Bihar in 2013 and recorded stories of domestic violence against women. And the other one would be a video by Ilya Animation about her abusive relationship with her boyfriend, which both of which links you will find in the description below. I will be discussing about etymology and concept of gaslighting, which I think most of you would be familiar with, since it is a majorly liberal following that I have gathered, if not at least a well-informed one. So I will just get through the regular meaning that everybody's aware of, that the entire point of gaslighting is to manipulate the person to get them to believe what you want them to believe is true, not what their senses tell them. For example, gaslighting could be about something as simple as a banana, which could be dealt as a pickle if you just insist that it's a pickle, and if 3 or 4 people would provide consensus for you to say that it's pickle, then it is a pickle and not a banana, and the person starts doubting themselves, which inadvertently turns to gaslighting. And of course, if you see domestic violence or domestic abuse around you, the child helpline number is 1098, which is open to all of the complaints related to the same. But at the same time, there is a website in the description below, the National Commission for Women.nic.in, ncw.nic.in, which might lead you to any help that you might need. Crisis resources numbers are given on that entire list. It's an exhaustive list. Go check it out, just in case you will ever need it, or if you're already in need of it. So that's that. Now let's get to gaslighting. Of course, I told you what the meaning is. Now the second thing to come is the etymology. Gaslighting comes from the play written by Patrick Hamilton in 1938 called Gaslights. And this play later on went on to become a movie in 1940, which was made by this gentleman called Thorold Dickinson, and then in 1944 again was readapted by George Cukor, if I'm not wrong. I've probably butchered those pronunciations. And the story of the play and then the movie is about how a woman is murdered in the beginning, and then 2 newlyweds enter the household to start their living and start their life in this new house, and the husband is clearly dimming down the gas lights that light up the household at night, and is looking for jewels of this woman who he has murdered, and he keeps denying it to his wife and keeps insisting that she is losing her mind. Their house is completely fine. The environment of the house keeps changing as he keeps going through the entire house, and over a period of time, the house has significantly changed. The gas lights are dimmed and the attic light is turned on, which was sealed off, and it keeps going up. Eventually, he starts talking to himself. He starts making rambling noises, rattling noises, and keeps denying her that this is happening at all. The end goal of this gentleman is to declare his wife crazy and get a power of attorney against her, so that he can take all the all the property that is in her name, and eventually, of course, broaden the scope and speed of the search for the jewels of the dead woman. And that's where gaslighting came from. It was used as a cultural reference by the 1960s, and by 1970s it was used by Florence Rush in his book about sexual abuse from a feminist point of view as a semi-psychoanalytic term. And Victor Calef and Edward Winchell sort of cemented its place in psychoanalytics as a proper terminology for the phenomenon, because it was so distinctly visible in abusive relationships, and it was cemented as an actual terminology that we use to this day. Now, I don't really need to explain much further than that. It's simple. You stress on what you want the victim to believe, cause them cognitive dissonance, cause them to question what they think is true, and eventually make them feel like they're insane when they're completely fine, and therefore justifying your abusive behavior patterns. And there are a few stages in which it happens. A lot of this might be Captain Obvious to you if you've already gone through the memo for gaslighting, and I'm sorry for that. You can just skip to the next episode. But I thought it was an interesting etymology to do, if not the rest of it. So I don't know if you've been following the podcast for a while, but we've done 2 episodes talking about truth and talking about truths too, in both of which we talk about the parameters of measuring truth to somebody who's locked behind the wall of perception. So in general, you don't know the truth because you see it. You see a phenomenon and you draw conclusions from it which resembles your understanding of truth. And we came across 3 parameters to understand what the truth is. Of course, those are commonality, consistency, and consensus. How often have you seen this? Where else have you seen this? And who else believes the same thing as you do? 3 of which together would form your understanding of truth as it exists. So the first thing you need to do is take the most easily manipulated quotient and turn that in your favor, consensus. If it is a single abuser, what they will end up doing is try to cut off or control every aspect of the social life of their victim, and make sure that they only see the person that they want them to see, or that confers the beliefs that they want to instill in this person. And if it's more than one abuser for this victim, then of course it will be easier for them, because consensus will be against this person. They will be clearly seeing something which will be denied to their face, and they will have no one to turn to because everybody else will treat them like they're crazy, which is quite a threatening strategy. So that's the first one you do. The other ones are, of course, attacking commonality and consensus. Here, now you're really pushing the person behind the wall of perception, is how I see it. Because these are standard manipulation tactics which could be pulled off by good acting and confidence, and of course a fair amount of sociopathy. Now, the first one is of course half-truths or withholding information, making sure that the person only discovers things and you have to tackle things one by one so that you can tire out the person you're trying to manipulate. Then there's selecting and assigning importance to information. The evidence that somebody finds in a debate against you or argument against you about something as grapes are sour is easy. It's just sensory perceptions that you've made, and you're trying to prove that your sensory perceptions are telling you these things. The other person is countering with that with something else. Now, in this case, take the OJ case for example. It's not an exact example, but there was so much evidence against OJ Simpson, but to convince the jury, all they had to do is say the glove didn't fit. And of course, confirmation bias of the jury comes in together, and whether or not Mr. Simpson did the crime or not, it really worked in their favor that they were able to disprove that, along with other factors in the case, that this person was innocent because a glove didn't fit, which was quite open to shrinkage and quite prone to shrinkage, and was one of the lead evidences provided by the prosecution. I feel like that's a poor example, so I might cut that out. But if it makes the cut, I hope you understand the point. Anyway, moving on. What they're trying to do is assign importance to the observations they have made and trivialize the observations that the other person has made. Exception to the rules become more important in these cases. For example, usually it's this way, but it can also be this way, is an argument that this person would make. The attempt is to trivialize or disprove the arguments that the other person is making. Again, a term in manipulation, playing against consistency as a pattern of truth. Then there's attacking the victim's credibility, which is esteem and intelligence. This is probably the most long-lasting damage that an abuser could do to a person psychologically, besides the physical abuse and the psychological trauma that they will leave them in. Those things are separately accounted for. Is that a permanent damage to their esteem, most probably a permanent damage, if not a temporary one, is that they will attack their credibility straight up. Their ability to form commonality and consistency across observations that they make with their senses is questioned rigorously. Most of the times in passing jokes or passing insult jokes, for example, calling them dumb on the smallest occasions, making sure that they show disappointment at the smallest of failures, to make the person feel like the other person is more intelligent than they are. This step could also contain verbal abuse at some times. And then, of course, there's undermining the victim and trivializing the events and observations that they have made, so that no matter what happens, any harm that comes to them seems like a normal or a trivial one. A busted lip, for example, is something that happens in a regular marriage. In this case, the abuser will try to portray that perception that this is completely normal behavior. And sometimes they're right. Rape culture also propagates some of this behavior. At least it used to. In India, it does in some circles, which is a problem on its own. But you understand how gaslighting could work. Now, the second step is, this is so generic, I don't know even if I'm going to keep it, is that what can you do when you know or when you feel like somebody's being gaslighted, or somebody who's being gaslighted is you? The first thing you do is reach out, ask your friends, have a credible connection that you ask, and look for consensus. This is a delicate step, because if you go to the wrong person, of course, this consensus is going to go further away from you. So it is important to choose a person that is reliable. And I understand how difficult that sounds from across the mic, like on the internet, but it's the best I can do right now. If you're the person who's being reached out to, the most harmful thing you can do to this person is question them with scrutiny and doubt. Right now, it is important that this person feels heard and believed, because understand that they're going through immense cognitive dissonance. What they believe and what they observe are completely different things, and that is causing them to be very frustrated and very irritable. So listening is a very important activity in this entire debacle. After that, of course, there's documentation of abuse. If there's anything that you can help with, is documentation and communication and listening. And beyond that, if you feel the call is actually true, then facilitate communication to the right authorities, facilitate communication to somebody who is known to handle situations like these or could help with identifying situations like these, form a trusted network against the abuser, and list contingent protocols as to, have a room in which they can hide in case the physical abuse is dangerous, or have trigger words to identify and prepare psychologically for the abuse and, act accordingly. Things like that. And I know that advice sounds generic and that's not how the real world works. But that's all I have from the textbook for now. This is a very textbook episode. Again, I would suggest that to understand gaslighting from a more up-close perspective, you check out Ilya Animation's video, which is quite revealing actually. As an experience, it helps you understand from an empathetic perspective. And the other one I would suggest is, of course, it's a much more serious video by a story hunter, where the documentation of abuse goes down. And that's that. I hope that was informative. And yeah, like, share, subscribe, support me on Patreon if you think the content is worth it. And stay safe during the quarantine. Please stay hydrated. And yeah, what else do I say? Goodbye.